Billionaire CEO secretly follows young black maid, home triplet boys. Call him dad out of nowhere. He didn't even flinch when I told him I was pregnant. Just stared at me across his leather couch and said, "You'll figure something out." Jasmine, we both know this was never going to be forever. Ah! That's when I realized the man I loved didn't see a baby. He saw baggage. 15 years later, I walked onto his stage wearing heels and his last name on my son's. When he found out I was pregnant, he said I was a mistake he couldn't afford. I was 21 when I told him. My hands were shaking so hard, the paper bag almost ripped. 2 pink lines, clear as daylight. And when I showed him the test, he didn't even blink, just leaned back in that oversized leather chair, crossed one leg over the other, and said, "You're smart. Jasmine, you'll figure something out." That was it. No panic, no apology, just indifference. Like I had told him, I was transferring majors, not carrying his child. Then came the second blow. We both knew this wasn't going anywhere. This, he gestured between us like it was a mistake written on the wall, was never going to be forever. I remember staring at the shadows dancing on his office walls and realizing the man I loved had never once loved me back. I left that apartment with dignity in my throat and heartbreak in my belly. I didn't cry until I reached the stairwell. That kind of silence, the kind that follows abandonment, it hums, it aches, it stays. My parents didn't ask questions. They didn't want details. They just wanted me gone. "You embarrassed this family." My mother said, "What will people think?" My father added, "You made your bed. Now lie in it." And so I did. I lay in it alone. 5 hours from campus, on a thin mattress in my grandmother's spare room. She didn't ask me to explain. She just opened the door and whispered, "You're not ruined. Baby, just bruised. And bruises fade." That winter, I gave birth to twin boys during a thunderstorm. The lights flickered, the power cut out, and in the dark, with no epidural, no husband, no plan, I became a mother. I used to think being left was the worst thing a man could do, but I was wrong. The worst thing is when they leave like you never mattered at all. And 15 years later, when I stood on that stage in New York, wearing heels, holding a mic, and hearing my sons call me mom, he was in the front row, staring, just like he had back then. Only this time, he knew what he lost. Chapter 1, The Billionaire's Goodbye. He kissed me that morning, soft, casual, like nothing in the world had changed. But something had. I was carrying his child, and for 3 days, I'd been building the courage to tell him, David Blackwell, Sandistombe Conator, heir to Blackwell Holdings, the boy everyone on campus whispered about in the cafeteria line, the man who wore custom shirts to class and drove a black Jaguar his father just gave him. He called our relationship unexpected. I called it love. I didn't realize we were speaking different languages until that afternoon. He let me into his apartment. Didn't even look up from the crystal decanter he was pouring from. "You look nervous," he said. I told him I had something important to say. He poured the scotch anyway. I held out the test like it was an apology. 2 pink lines. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. He stared at it, then at me, took a sip, set the glass down, and said, "So what are you going to do?" That was it. Not we. You. I swallowed hard. "I thought you'd want to talk about it." "Jasmine," he said, his voice flat. "You knew what this was. We were having fun. We weren't planning a family." I felt it then, like a glass wall shattering inside me. I'd spent months believing this was something real. Now, I realized it was something he'd been able to walk away from the entire time. I stood there, frozen, trying to understand how someone could be so calm while breaking something sacred. David, I'm scared. I don't have anyone else. He adjusted the cuff of his sleeve. You'll figure something out. You're smart. Just like that. Dismissed. I didn't cry. Not in front of him. Not when he said, "It's better we end this now before it gets messier." I remember the way his voice didn't even crack. The way he checked his phone as I stood there, like I was a task he'd crossed off for the day. I walked out. 3 hours later, I was sitting on the floor of my dorm bathroom, the tile cold beneath me, a towel clutched to my chest like armor. And I kept whispering the same sentence over and over. He left. He really left. I thought that would be the lowest point, but I hadn't gone home yet. My parents believed in appearances. Church on Sunday, perfect grades, no boys in the house, ever. When I told them, my mother dropped the casserole dish she was holding. It shattered across the tile floor like my future had just exploded in real time. "You've humiliated us," she whispered, backing away like I was contagious. What will the neighbors think? My father didn't say a word. He just stared at me with this blank, wounded look the kind men give when they care more about the headlines than your heartbeat. Then he said it. "You can't stay here." I laughed. I actually laughed, not because it was funny, but because I needed one of them to say something human. Anything! But all they gave me was a suitcase. So I packed, not out of choice, out of survival, a few sweaters, my laptop, my toothbrush, and the baby inside me, the one no one wanted, the one I hadn't even named yet, but already loved. I thought about calling David. I wanted to scream into his voicemail. I wanted to ask if he slept well that night, but I didn't. Instead, I texted the only person left in my contacts who might open the door, Grandma Louise. I hadn't seen her in a year. She lived in a small house in the mountains, didn't own much, didn't talk much, but when I called and said, "Grandma, I have nowhere to go," she said, "Then baby, you come home. You come right now. No questions, no judgment, just love." I took the 6:15 bus out of Raleigh that night. It was snowing, and I sat in the very back row, forehead pressed to the icy glass, hands shaking in my coat pockets. I remember thinking, this isn't how my life was supposed to go. But what I didn't know yet was that sometimes the goodbye you think will destroy you is really the one that sets you free. He closed the door on me and our child, but he didn't realize I was the one carrying the future. Chapter 2. Kicked out. Taken in. I didn't look back. Not at the porch light. Not at the front door that once meant safety. And definitely not at the mother who turned her face to the wall when I said goodbye. I walked down the driveway with everything I owned in one duffel bag. And a truth no one wanted to carry with me. I was pregnant and completely alone. The January wind cut through my coat like razors. Each step felt heavier than the last. Not just from the weight of the bag, but from the silence. That kind of silence doesn't come from being alone. It comes from being unwanted. The bus station was mostly empty. The ticket guy looked at my stomach once, didn't say anything, just handed me the stub with tired eyes. "Last one to Asheville leaves in 20 minutes. One way," I said, as if I had a choice. I sat in the back, pressed my cheek to the window, and whispered the only name that still felt like hope. Grandma. She hadn't seen me in over a year, not since I'd started college and gotten too busy to visit. But when I'd called her from the bathroom floor, voice cracking, shaking so bad I could barely say the words, she didn't hesitate. "You come home now. Jasmine, I'll leave the porch light on." That light was the only thing I had left. Her house looked smaller than I remembered, a little brick square tucked into the Blue Ridge Mountains. The garden was frozen over. Wind chimes rattled like bones in the cold, but the porch light was still glowing. She opened the door before I could knock. Her hands were small, warm. She looked at my face, at my eyes, at the shape of me now. And she didn't flinch. No disappointment. No shame. Just this low, tired whisper. Come inside. Baby, you're safe now. She let me sleep late the next morning. Made oatmeal. Not the instant kind. Real oats. Brown sugar. A little cinnamon. Like she used to when I had the flu as a kid. We didn't talk about my parents. She didn't ask about the father. All she said was, "You're carrying something sacred, and it's gonna be okay." And for the first time in weeks, I believed her. There was no nursery, no money for cribs or fancy baby books, just a spare room with yellow walls and a twin bed. She gave me her sewing pillow to sleep with when my back started to ache. At night, I'd lie there and press my hands to my belly. I couldn't feel them move yet, but I'd whisper to them anyway. "You're coming into this world with nothing, but I promise, you won't be nothing." We went to the free clinic on Tuesdays. Grandma drove her old pickup truck, the heater barely working, but she'd hold my hand during the sonograms, tears quietly falling. Every time we heard two little heartbeats. "Twins," the nurse said with a smile. "You're gonna have your hands full." I wanted to laugh, but the truth was, I already did. I got a part-time remote job tutoring underclassmen in math, $12 an hour, enough for prenatal vitamins and oatmeal. I coded at night. When Grandma fell asleep watching Judge Judy, I was rusty, slow, but I remembered how it felt to build something from nothing, like watching yourself rise. There were days I cried into the sink, nights I held my belly and wondered if they'd hate me one day for the life I gave them. But then I'd remember what Grandma said. Being scared don't mean you're not strong. It just means you're human, baby girl. 7 months passed. My belly stretched, my back ached. My savings barely covered groceries, but we made it. Grandma mended baby blankets out of old flannel shirts. I stitched lines of code between morning sickness and Braxton Hicks. The twins kicked for the first time during a thunderstorm. And I remember thinking, they're already fighting to live. I have to fight too. The night they came, the power went out. We lit candles in the hallway. Grandma's hands were steady. Mine were not. "You're doing good. Baby, you're almost there," I screamed. I begged God to slow time. I saw stars. I tasted iron. And then 2 cries, back to back, like lightning and thunder. Michael, Marcus, 2 perfect boys wrapped in borrowed towels. I held them to my chest and cried harder than I ever had, because I hadn't just survived. I had delivered the very thing he left me for. He walked away from us like we were a burden. But what he didn't see was that he left behind everything worth becoming. Chapter 3. Code, Coffee, and Crying at 3 a.m. The boys were 3 months old when the nights started bleeding into each other. Michael had colic. Marcus never liked to sleep alone. And I hadn't seen my reflection in weeks. My hair stayed tied in the same loose bun. There were breast milk stains on every shirt I owned. And the only thing I knew how to measure anymore was ounces and ounces and ounces of formula I could barely afford. But every night, after I rocked them to sleep, after Grandma had gone to bed, after the dishes were done, and the heater rattled its tired hum, I opened my laptop. It was secondhand. The space bar stuck. The fan hissed louder than the baby sometimes. But it worked, and so did I. 1 tab for tutorials, 1 tab for job listings, and a dozen more for every line of broken code I couldn't seem to fix. I wasn't building a dream. I was building survival. 1 script, 1 failed compile, 1 exhausted cup of instant coffee at a time. They say genius is born from talent, but they never talk about the kind of genius that's born from necessity. I wasn't trying to change the world. I was trying to afford diapers without choosing between heat and food. I was trying to make sure Grandma didn't have to sell the house just to keep us afloat. Most nights, I cried around 3 a.m., not from sadness, but from how big the silence felt, from how no one, Not a single person in the world was waiting for me to make it. And still, I kept typing. It started with a small idea, a simple app that could help seniors track their heart rate at home. Something for grandma. She'd had chest pains a few weeks after the twins were born. We sat in the ER for 8 hours before someone even ran an EKG. If I'd known sooner, I whispered that night, maybe I could have done something. So I built the thing I wished we'd had, a small tool, an algorithm that could flag early warning signs for heart irregularities using only a smartwatch and open source medical data. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't funded, but it worked, and it gave me something to believe in again. I entered it into a virtual coding competition on a whim. Didn't even finish the description. Submitted. The whole thing. 17 minutes before the deadline. I didn't expect anything. So when the email came in 3 weeks later, subject line, finalist, Open Health Hackathon, NYC. I read it 3 times, then dropped the phone and stared at the twins like they had written it themselves. We're going, I whispered. We're getting on that bus. We didn't have money for hotels. So I emailed the organizer and asked if I could bring my sons. They said yes, not kindly, just legally. We slept in a friend's living room on the Upper West Side. The twins shared a couch cushion. I stayed up reviewing my code with headphones in, and nerves unraveling inside my chest. When it was my turn to pitch, my hands shook the entire time. There were investors in suits, VCs with pens and no eye contact, men who looked like David, and women who reminded me what I was not. But I told them the truth. I'm not a business major. I'm not an Ivy grad. I'm a mother, a daughter, and someone who knows what it feels like to be helpless in an ER at 2 a.m. So I built this so that no one else has to feel that way again. I didn't win, but someone in the back of the room asked for a word afterward. Her name was Linda Yang. She ran a small investment firm focused on female-led health startups. Your prototype is messy, she said. Your UI is outdated, and your math needs tightening. Then she paused, looked me in the eye. But the vision is sound, and so are you. 3 weeks later, she wired me $20 in seed money, enough for a better laptop, an LLC, and my first real team, Taylor Tech, was born on a kitchen table in rural North Carolina, right next to a drying rack full of baby bottles. The boys learned their alphabet by watching me name variables. They'd sit beside me and pretend to debug the screen with crayons. Marcus once told his preschool teacher, "My mommy teaches robots to care about hearts." I cried in the parking lot for 30 minutes after that because no one saw the tears, or the cracked nipples, or the nights I passed out with my head on the keyboard. But he did. They both did. It took 4 years to raise our first official round. We hit 0 downloads. The day Michael lost his first tooth, I pitched to investors while still wearing breast milk pads under my blazers. And every single time they said no, I went home, kissed my boys goodnight, and coded harder. I didn't have a last name that opened doors, but I had 2 little reasons to never stop knocking. He left me with nothing but silence, and in that silence, I taught myself how to build something louder than his name. Chapter 4. Taylor Tech Rises. It didn't happen all at once. Success never does, at least not for women like me. There was no champagne, no sudden viral story, just progress. Slow and steady, a few downloads, then a few hundred, and then 1 email. It came from a rural clinic in Tennessee. Your app caught something our nurse missed. A 64-year-old patient came in for a cough. Your algorithm flagged arrhythmia. We sent her to cardiology. She's alive today because of that. I stared at the screen for a long time. The kind of silence that doesn't hurt, just humbles you. I whispered it out loud. It's working. The press found us 6 months later. A small tech blog ran a piece called The mom who coded her way out of poverty. I hated the title, loved the attention. Suddenly, people wanted to know who I was, how I'd built a health tech startup without seed funding or a co-founder, how I coded while nursing twins, how I balanced motherhood with metrics. I told them the truth. Every time, I didn't balance anything. I dropped balls constantly, but I never dropped my boys, and I never dropped the mission. Investors started to call. Tech conferences began sending invites. One in particular stood out. A bold white envelope arrived in the mail, embossed gold letters, Manhattan Global Health and AI Summit, featured innovator address. At first, I laughed. I thought it was a mistake. Then I read the last line, a list of keynote guests, fourth name down, David Blackwell, CEO, Blackwell Pharmaceuticals. And just like that, every cell in my body went still. It had been 15 years since he leaned across his couch and called me a problem, since he looked at my pregnancy like it was a math equation he didn't feel like solving. I hadn't seen him, hadn't heard a word, didn't even know if he was still in New York. Now, he'd be front row at a summit where I was the speaker, and he had no idea I was coming. I didn't RSVP right away. I thought about it for days. I watched the boys at dinner, arguing over who invented Wi-Fi. I watched Grandma peeling sweet potatoes, humming gospel under her breath, and I stared at the mirror in the hallway, the one I used to avoid when my belly was swollen and my heart was wrecked. Then I emailed the event host. Confirmed, Jasmine Taylor, CEO, Taylor Tech. I'll be there. The flight was bumpy. The hotel smelled like roses and money. Michael and Marcus had never been to Manhattan. They pressed their faces to the hotel window and counted taxis like they were fireflies. Do you think he'll recognize us? Michael asked. I didn't flinch. No, I said, but he'll recognize what he lost. Backstage before my panel, someone tried to offer me a stylist. I declined. I wore a deep navy dress, simple, sharp, the same color as the hospital blanket they first wrapped my twins in. I wore my natural curls loose, just like Grandma loved them. I didn't need to look like power. I was the proof of it. The MC announced my name. The audience clapped. I stepped out into the spotlight, and there he was. Second row, David Blackwell. Same jawline, same cold posture, but now, smaller. A man whose company had been sliding in stock for the past 2 years. Whispers of layoffs, failed trials, empty innovation. And me, the woman he left behind, now standing above him. I opened my talk with a story. 15 years ago, I was 21, pregnant, and told I was a mistake. I was kicked out of my home, told to disappear. But instead of vanishing, I wrote code. I studied hearts, and I built something that could outlive rejection. A few people leaned forward in their seats. David didn't blink. I didn't do it with money. I didn't do it with a powerful last name. I did it because 2 little boys looked at me every morning like I was the whole world, and I refused to let them grow up believing they were born from shame. When it ended, people stood, applauding. David didn't stand. He just watched, like a man realizing too late that the girl he once dismissed now held a room he could no longer enter. He told me I was a phase, but a phase doesn't become a movement. A mistake doesn't build an empire. And a girl who was left behind doesn't stand on a stage like that unless she's the one who finally rose. Chapter 5. A mother walks on stage. The lobby buzzed with money, silk dresses, sharp suits, name tags that cost more than some people's rent. And in the center of it, all me. Jasmine Taylor, not as a guest, not as someone's assistant, as the keynote speaker. The girl who once coded on borrowed Wi-Fi and heated baby bottles on a stovetop was now the headliner at the most exclusive health tech summit in Manhattan. Funny how rooms look different when you walk in standing tall. The boys were with me, Michael wore a fitted charcoal blazer, nervous but steady. Marcus had his curls slicked back, fingers twitching in his pockets. They weren't just tagging along. They had their own panel later, young innovators in AI and human wellness. At 15, they were already making waves. Someone from the conference committee asked, "Are these your students?" I smiled. "They're my sons." The woman blinked. "Oh, I see. You started early." I smiled again, softer this time. "No, I started right on time." I watched them take the small stage first. They spoke about signal processing, about bias in AI health predictions, about ethics and equity and building tech that doesn't forget people who look like us. People whispered not just about how smart they were, but about their last name, Taylor, like Jasmine Taylor. Wait, are they hers? And then, who's their father? No one knew until Michael answered the final question with perfect stillness. Our mom built Taylor Tech from our living room. She taught herself everything. She taught us everything. We are the sons of the woman who never quit. Backstage, I heard the applause before I even walked out. They didn't know I was listening, didn't know I'd been crying behind the curtain, not because of nerves, but because. In all the years I imagined this moment, I never knew it would feel like peace. When the MC called my name again, the crowd rose. My heels clicked softly across the hardwood stage, and my heart, it didn't race, because I wasn't walking into battle. I was walking into truth. David sat second row, hands clasped, expression unreadable, not shocked, not smug, just watching. He looked older, not in a bad way, just like life had finally started touching him too. He didn't look like the boy who had left me pregnant on a couch. He looked like the man who remembered that moment every time he saw my name. I took the mic. I don't want to talk about numbers today, not investments, not downloads. I want to talk about what builds us. There was a stillness in the room, like they sensed something more important was about to be said. I want to talk about being 19 and scared, about hearing a man tell you, "You'll figure it out," and realizing that's the last kindness you'll ever get from him. About holding your belly on a bus seat because your parents said, "Not under this roof," and building a company not because it was trending, but because your babies were sleeping in the next room, and you were the only one who knew how to save them. Someone in the audience wiped a tear. David still didn't move. I was told I was a mistake, a moment of weakness, that nothing good would come from me. I paused, but look at my sons. Michael and Marcus stood at the back of the room now, heads high, every inch of them, a silent sermon. They are brilliant. They are kind. They are mine. And I raised them alone. I looked at David, not to shame him, but because I wanted him to see this is what he walked away from. Not just me, but the empire, the legacy, the life. The applause didn't erupt like fireworks. It started like rain, soft, unstoppable, and then everywhere. People stood, hands clapping, some nodding through tears. David didn't stand. He just sat there, staring, and in his silence, I heard something I never heard back then. Regret, backstage. The boys wrapped their arms around me. I held them tight. "Was that okay?" I whispered. Michael smiled. "You killed it." Marcus grinned. "Did you see his face?" I did. And I knew something they didn't yet. There's a deeper justice than revenge. It's becoming everything they said you'd never be. He left when I was at my beginning, and now, at my highest, he can't even stand. Chapter 6. The Man Who Walked Away. He found me in the hallway. The stage had emptied. The cameras were off. People lingered with cocktails and compliments, but I slipped out the side door, past the velvet ropes, past the noise. I needed air. That's where he caught up with me. David Blackwell, wearing guilt like a tailored suit. He said my name like it still belonged to him. Jasmine. I didn't turn, not at first. The last time he'd said my name, I was holding a pregnancy test. He was holding a drink. I faced him slowly. He looked tired, not just physically tired the way men look, when life finally asks them to feel something real. "You were amazing up there," he said. I nodded once, polite. "Cool," untouched. "They said you'd be here." I replied, "I came anyway." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You always did surprise me." That word surprise landed like glass. That's what I'd been to him. Once, an unexpected detour, a semester-long thrill, something to look back on with detachment. "You knew they were yours," I said quietly. "Didn't you?" He didn't deny it. I thought maybe, but I didn't ask. The hallway went still. Somewhere in the distance, a saxophone played low from the reception room. People were laughing, toasting, but this space between us felt like the edge of a cliff. "You didn't ask," I repeated. "You didn't want to know." His jaw tightened. I wasn't ready. I was 22. I had a life mapped out. I raised my eyebrows. "And I didn't," he sighed. "I made a mistake." That word again, mistake. The word men use when they want forgiveness, without touching the cost. I stepped closer. "Do you know what it's like to give birth in a blackout, with no power, no epidural, and no one but your grandmother holding your hand?" He didn't answer. "Do you know what it's like to carry two lives inside you, while carrying the silence of a man who wouldn't even look back?" Still, nothing. So I kept going. "Do you know what it's like to raise boys who look like the man who left you and still love every inch of them?" His face cracked. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "but it wasn't enough. Not because it wasn't sincere, but because it was 15 years too late. They don't know you." I said, "They don't miss you, and they don't need you." He blinked like the words stung. "And what about you?" he asked, almost a whisper. "Do you hate me?" I took a breath, not to calm down, but to make sure I said the truth. "No," I said, "I don't hate you, David. I just don't carry you anymore." He nodded, slowly, like that was the heaviest truth of all. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. "If they ever want to talk, if you ever need anything." I held up my hand. "We have everything we need." And with that, I walked away. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I didn't collapse in the bathroom like I had all those years ago. Because the strongest women don't break when they're reminded of who left. They rise because of it. He came back thinking I'd still be that girl on his couch. But I'm not her anymore. I'm the woman who lived through her absence and made it a kingdom. Chapter 7. Vioa seon sorkionsis ontentitimi. Osalasis seek. Of what could have been, he poured the scotch too fast. It splashed over the rim, soaked into the mahogany desk he never used anymore. Not since the board began calling him a liability. Outside his Manhattan penthouse, the skyline glittered. Below, people moved like ants' lives, bustling, building, chasing things. David just stood there, staring at his reflection, at his silence, at his failure. He'd watched her on stage. She didn't flinch, didn't falter, didn't even look for him until the very end. She was everything he remembered, and absolutely nothing like the girl he walked away from. Jasmine had become someone the world leaned toward, someone unshakable, someone who didn't need his last name. He had Googled her that night, not just the company, her, articles, interviews, a viral video of her sons explaining how they built a mini ECG monitor from scratch. Michael and Marcus, both with her eyes, both with his jawline. He didn't need a paternity test. They were his, every inch of them. And yet, he was a stranger. David Blackwell, CEO in name only, heir to a pharmaceutical empire, now aging faster than its shareholders. His own company hadn't had a breakthrough in 3 years. Their last clinical trial failed. FDA pulled a drug last month And Taylor Tech, their software just got picked up by 3 hospitals in London. Her code was saving people. His lawyers were saving him from a PR disaster. He walked through his apartment in the dark, past the cold fireplace, past the untouched dining table, past the framed photo of his father. The man who taught him never to apologize, only to recover. He wondered if Jasmine had ever hated him, if she still did, and more than that, he wondered who he could have been if he had stayed. He saw flashes of it, a life, not flashy, not spotless, but real. Mornings, with twins crawling across a kitchen floor. Nights helping with science projects. Jasmine curled beside him on a second-hand couch, wearing a hoodie, barefoot laughing at a screen. He could have loved her, but love isn't just a feeling. It's a decision, and he chose wrong. The board met with him the next day. They asked about mergers, expansion, acquisitions. One name came up more than once, Taylor Tech. A junior partner even suggested they approach Jasmine, ask her to license her software, or better sell. David said nothing, just tapped his pen against the table. Because even in a boardroom full of power, he felt like a man who had already lost. That night, back in the penthouse, he pulled out the card she refused to take, still in his pocket, bent at the corner. Not for her, for them, the boys, his sons. He wondered if they'd ever want to know him, if they ever should. And for the first time in years, David Blackwell sat down and cried. He built his empire on strategy, but the one thing he couldn't calculate was the cost of walking away from love. Chapter 8. He tries to apologize. The email came through a private inbox. Subject line, coffee. DB. No greeting, no apology, just a line that shouldn't have shaken me. But it did. I stared at the screen for 5 full minutes, not because I was surprised, but because part of me had wondered how long it would take. The silence after a reckoning is always loudest for the one left behind. I met him, not for closure. I already had that. Not for curiosity, I'd outgrown it. I met him because I needed to see if he had changed. We sat in a small cafe near the High Line, quiet, neutral ground. He was already there when I walked in, nursing an espresso and a lifetime of mistakes. He stood when he saw me, still wearing those expensive suits, still holding his shoulders, like reputation lived there. But his eyes, they weren't arrogant anymore, just tired. "Thanks for coming," he said. "I didn't come for you," I replied. He smiled, sad and knowing. For them, then I nodded. We sat in silence for a while. The clink of cups, the hum of low jazz. 2 people who once shared everything, now unsure of what's even safe to ask. Finally, he broke it. "I owe you more than I can put into words." I didn't flinch. "You owed me something 15 years ago. Words are late. They don't matter now." He looked down at his hands. I know. He pulled out a photo, worn at the edges, a printout of a news clipping. Michael and Marcus standing beside their robotics trophy, grinning, eyes bright. "I keep this in my drawer," he said softly. "I've watched every clip, read every article. They're incredible." "They're mine," I said, not out of anger, just truth. "They are who they are, because I stayed when you left." He nodded, slow and heavy. "I was selfish, afraid. I didn't know how to be anything but my father's son." "Then you should have stayed away," I said. "Don't come back now, just because they've made you proud." The words landed hard. He didn't deny them. Then he asked the question I knew was coming. "Would you let me meet them?" I paused. "Not yet," I said. "Maybe not ever." He looked stunned, but he didn't fight it. "I understand." "Do you?" I asked. "Because they don't know you. They've never asked about you. They've never needed you." I leaned forward. "You're asking to be part of their lives, now that they're whole. But I was the one who built them, piece by piece, from the ground up, through every flu, Every scraped knee, every question about why their friends had dads and they didn't. I stood up. You don't get to insert yourself now and call it love. Love doesn't arrive when it's convenient. It stays when it's hard. He didn't follow me when I left. He just sat there, maybe for minutes, maybe for hours. I didn't look back. Back home. Marcus asked where I'd been. Michael didn't even glance up from his laptop. I just said, someone from the past, nothing to worry about. Because it wasn't, not anymore. He came to apologize. But I didn't need his sorry. I already had something stronger. A life he'll never be part of. Chapter 9. The Investor's Final Offer. The offer came in a white envelope, hand-delivered. No email, no warning. Just a knock on the office door and a man in a suit saying, Blackwell Holdings would like to schedule a meeting. The twins were doing homework at the kitchen table behind me. Grandma Louise was peeling apples in the next room. And suddenly the past, the one I thought I buried, was trying to buy a seat at my table. The next morning, I sat across from 4 men in polished shoes. One of them smiled too much. One didn't smile at all. Taylor Tech has potential, the lead partner said, and Blackwell is prepared to accelerate that growth. I waited. Our proposal is simple. We offer full acquisition, cash, equity, title transition for you, CTO, if you prefer. I looked down at the paper. $42 million for my company, for my name, for everything I built with cracked knuckles and night feedings and crying on bathroom floors. Why now? I asked. They didn't flinch. We're restructuring. We want innovation, and quite frankly, your product is outperforming our own systems in early testing. You've built something extraordinary. That part was true, but there was something they didn't say. David had sent them. He hadn't shown his face, but I could feel him in every carefully worded clause, every flattering lie dressed as opportunity. He couldn't control the narrative anymore, so now he wanted to own it. I folded the paper, set it on the table like it was napkin trash. Thank you, I said. But no, their smiles froze. This is a significant offer. One of them said, so was the life I built. Without your help, he opened his mouth, closed it again. I stood. You don't get to erase my struggle and rebrand it as innovation. I didn't build Taylor Tech to be swallowed by the same machine that left me pregnant and unemployed at 21. They offered to let me think it over, said they'd call next week, send a revised term sheet. I said not to bother. I walked out of that meeting into sunlight, wind tugging at the hem of my coat like a secret. I didn't feel like I'd lost $42 million. I felt like I'd just reclaimed 15 years of silence. Back at the house, the boys were making grilled cheese. Grandma was humming a hymn in the garden. Marcus looked up. You okay? Mom. I kissed his forehead. Better then. Okay. Michael smirked. You said no. Didn't you? I did. Good, he said, biting his sandwich. Would have been weird, having your face on their website. Later that night, I opened my laptop, typed the final lines of code for our next release. The notification popped up on the corner of the screen. One new hospital onboarded, and I smiled, because no amount of money would ever feel better than saving a life with my own 2 hands. He tried to buy the woman he abandoned, but I don't sell what I bled to build. Chapter 10. The stage is hers. The lights were warm, not blinding, just soft enough to remind you, you've made it. The stage at Harvard wasn't built for women like me, not mothers who once cried over eviction notices, not daughters who were told to leave home because they dared to survive. But here I was, invited, headlining the commencement ceremony, and I wasn't nervous. I was ready. Michael and Marcus sat in the front row, taller than I remembered. Men now, not just my sons, but living, breathing proof that love does more than protect. It builds. Behind them sat faces I didn't know. Future doctors, coders, activists, writers, eager, restless, like I once was before heartbreak turned my name into a warning. And somewhere in the back, quiet, David Blackwell, no suit, no announcement, just a man sitting in the back of the room, watching. I didn't flinch. I stepped to the mic. 15 years ago, I sat in a waiting room, holding a sonogram in one hand, and my future falling apart in the other. Silence. I was told to go home, told I was reckless, told the world had no place for a single, black, broke, pregnant college girl. I glanced at my sons. Turns out the world was wrong. A few people clapped. I kept going. I built a company from a kitchen table. I taught myself how to code because no one would hire me. I raised twins on prayer and peanut butter sandwiches. And I didn't do it to prove anyone wrong. I did it so my sons would never grow up thinking love leaves when things get hard. Now the clapping grew. Tears in the back rows. Young women nodding. Older men looking down at their shoes. They say success is the best revenge, but I don't believe that. Revenge is loud, but healing is quiet. And this, I looked around the room, my voice softer now. This is healing. When it was over, the standing ovation wasn't for my resume. It wasn't for my degrees. It was for my survival. For every woman in the crowd who had been told to sit down and chose to rise instead. Later, I stepped outside alone, shoes in one hand, speech in the other. David was there, at the edge of the quad. He didn't come closer. He just raised one hand, small, quiet. A gesture that wasn't an apology, just recognition. I nodded and kept walking. We didn't speak again, and that was okay, because I had already said everything that mattered. On the stage, in my sons, in the silence, I no longer feared. He left when I was nobody, but I became somebody without him. And today, I didn't just stand on that stage. The stage was mine. Well, what we carry, sometimes, the people who leave us don't realize what they gave us in the process. David thought he gave me emptiness, but what he really gave me was space. Space to grow, to become, to build something no one could take credit for but me. He never saw our sons' first steps, never sat through their fevers, never read their science fair forms, or heard them say, "I want to be just like you, Mom." But I did. I was there for every stumble, every question, every late night cry, not just theirs, but mine, too. And I didn't just raise children. I raised a version of myself that no one ever thought could survive. The world will try to tell you that power lives in boardrooms, in inheritance, in titles, but let me tell you where it really lives. Power lives in the women who stay when everyone else leaves. Power lives in cracked hands, tired eyes, and courage that whispers instead of shouts. Power lives in the mothers, in the grandmothers, in the girls who were once told, "You'll never make it," and still did. So here's what I hope you remember. You don't need a man to come back to say you were worth it. You already were, even if he never looks back, even if he never apologizes, even if the world never says thank you. You are still enough. You are still whole. You are still powerful because you stayed. And if this story touched something in you, maybe because you've been her, maybe because you are her, then just know you're not alone. The next story we tell goes even deeper, and I hope you'll be there for it. Because women like Jasmine, we don't disappear. We rise